Tánaiste, there is a great deal of concern at the minute in relation to the situation at Baldonnell. There has been the departure recently of some air traffic control personnel, which is resulting in a significant reduction in the capacity of Baldonnell, with consequent significant implications for government aircraft and obviously Air Corps aircraft, but wider than that too, in terms of sea rescue and so on. So I wish to get an update on that situation, how you intend to resolve it.
Thanks to Deputy O'Leary for raising this important matter, and it provides me with an opportunity to set out the position and the immediate steps that I and Government have taken to ensure that the restriction in relation to air traffic control services operating in Baldonnell is restored to full service. Initial indications from the military authorities were received in my department in May on the likelihood of challenges in relation to service provision, and since then significant engagement has taken place and a number of immediate actions were identified. This week I sought and secured government approval for the introduction with immediate effect of a service commitment scheme for air traffic control personnel, new entry options to air traffic control service, namely a direct entry option, new promotion opportunities within the service, and outsourcing of aspects of the training provided. All of the above individual actions are now being actioned and are aimed at ensuring that both existing personnel and indeed those known to be considering leaving the service are incentivised to remain in the service. These actions build on other specific measures that have been introduced, including the provision of a mentor in provision of air traffic control, the introduction of a bespoke air traffic control cadetship competition in 2024, which has been advertised again this year. The actions pursued are aimed at delivering an ongoing stream of qualified people to fill vacancies as they arise. I want to assure the Deputy that I'm firmly resolved to ensuring minimum disruption to services, and in that regard my officials are also actively engaged with their Air Corps colleagues in securing additional resources, including from external service providers, to ensure all avenues are being examined. Looking to the longer term, I advised Cabinet this week of my intention to have a peer review of how our air traffic control services are provided against how other militaries provide similar services. We know there's a worldwide shortage of air traffic controllers. We know we've seen pinch points like this before, absolutely, and therefore I do think it's important that we actually look and learn from how other militaries are addressing similar challenges. So I want to thank the Chief of Staff for working with me closely in relation to this. I was asked to get that service service commitment scheme in place with immediate effect. We've done that this week, and I expect people to get on with it.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I suppose a couple of things arise, Tánaiste. The first thing is the issue of service commitment levels is something that we discussed only in our last session, and it reflects the fact that this is an issue across a number of areas in the Defence Forces where specialist personnel and there is severe competition with the private sector, and it appears that it hit a particular pinch point here in Baldonnell. Like, we have a situation, this is the home of the Air Corps, it is the most important military air and aerospace facility in the state, and it is effectively operating 9 to 5. And, you know, I suppose I quote former TD Carl Berry, our former colleague, who identified that this is a perfect example of a single point of failure. This is a potential to cause the entire operation to end. So the entire basis of functioning of the Air Corps is challenged by this. But I would say as well, Tánaiste, that he flagged and others have flagged that this has been an issue that has been brought to the attention of the Air Corps, of the Department of Defence and the Defence Forces more generally for some time now. So when was the first recommendation made to Government in relation to a service level commitment for air traffic controllers?
No, thanks very much. So a couple of things here. So the service commitment scheme has been referenced, I think, for a number of years from my recollection, and it's no more than my recollection, but I think about in 2021, I think this might have surfaced in a list of recommendations. I think I'm open to correction on that year. But generally the way of progressing these is through both the local bargaining, and indeed, if in fairness, you'll recognise that normally the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform would say go through the local bargaining, there's a pot of funding there, and work that out. Because of the importance of the issues you've highlighted, that this is our national military airfield, we've decided to act outside of local bargaining. Very rare that you'd actually take these decisions outside of normal public sector pay processes, but we're doing that because of the immediacy of it. I do want to say, though, to try and reassure people, Two things. One, I was told by military leadership that if we got this in place, they believed it would make a very real difference in relation to people who are considering leaving to actually staying. And therefore, I do expect a significant restoration of services at Baldonnel very, very quickly. And the second thing I would say is contingency arrangements have been put in place with other agencies. And I do want people, including bad actors, to know that, that actually there are measures in place to ensure that there are contingency arrangements.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, you know, to be honest, it does seem that local bargaining seems to be the solution to a lot of things, and I'm not sure how far that 1% is going to stretch to fix all of those issues, to be totally honest. And it does seem to me as if this was allowed to get, not to the 11th hour, beyond the 11th hour, before it was addressed. And this in the context of people talking about, you know, we need to ensure that we're taking issues around defence seriously, and yet it was allowed to escalate to the position of the National Airfield functioning 9 to 5 and struggling to do that, as far as I understand it. So, Tánaiste, a couple of quick things. First, at what stage do you think that the full cover will be restored once again, that aircraft will be able to land outside of the 9 to 5 situation? I would also ask, you know, there is a potential issue in the medium run in relation to the EU presidency and the need for defence cover, you know, in terms of heads of state arriving here and so on. And finally, have you any concerns in relation to the implications of this for helicopter emergency medical service support, particularly in the West Coast and Shannon?
Thank you very much. So in relation to that, I've been assured that contingency arrangements are in place. Secondly, I expect significant restoration of services at Baldonnel to happen very rapidly. And the reason I expect that to be the case is in my conversations with military leadership and indeed with the new Chief of Staff of the Defence Forces, I was made aware, and this is, and you're right, I'll come back to this in a moment because you are right about how we do need to look more at the pinch points in our Defence Forces in general, but I was made aware that there's a number of people who may well leave the Air Corps as air traffic controllers to go and work in different environments as they're entitled to, and providing this service commitment scheme may indeed make a fundamental difference in terms of them changing their position. So we've delivered our bit now in terms of the government putting this in place. I expect Defence Force leadership and Air Corps leadership now to do their part, and I know that they will. I would say I agree with you on your broader point, and there's a question either from you or Deputy Crowe later, and I'll come to it, but in relation to how we look specifically at some of the technical skills required in our Defence Forces, separate and distinct to how we look at broader issues around recruitment and retention. I think there's great sense in that.
Well, good. Bogamodurai go kesh a do in anam on chachta Gibney to Shishina Togo le kesh the car, so 2 and 4 groups, so Tosomoj le and chachta Gibney.
Good. Tánaiste, we've discussed the issues pertaining to the abolition of the triple lock many times now. And I'm reading the draft bill which seeks to do this. I'm struck by the apparent lack of human rights monitoring mechanisms which could be included as safeguards for deployment, given the removal of the human rights monitoring at UN level. What human rights monitoring, if any, is envisaged to ensure that missions which we take part in are human rights compliant?
Good morning, and thank you to Deputy Gibney for the question. So as the Deputy will be aware, and as she's alluded to, I brought forward the general scheme of the Defence Amendment Bill 2025, which amends the legislation underpinning overseas deployments of the Defence Forces. This was agreed by Cabinet on the 4th of March. The bill will, among other things, provide for the modification of the existing requirement regarding the dispatch of the Defence Forces for service outside the state as part of an international force. Under the current proposals in the general scheme to amend the existing legislation, the requirement for a UN mandate will be removed. I wish to again underline that the legislation in place currently allows members of the UN Security Council by means of a veto, or indeed threat of same, to bind Ireland's hands in its international peacekeeping engagements. The veto by a UN Security Council member on a proposed resolution for a full and unconditional ceasefire in Gaza on the 4th of June last is further evidence of this, and it's simply untenable for this government to continue with this policy. I saw some people at a press conference recently who, at a press conference opposing the abolition of the triple lock, and then asking me to send the Navy to the humanitarian blockade in Gaza. There wouldn't be a UN mandate to do that. So, I mean, the inconsistency in relation to this is quite breathtaking. I strongly believe, therefore, that such consideration on international engagements should be within our sovereign control. The people of Ireland decide where our peacekeepers go. their democratically elected officials decide, not people who have never received one vote in any constituency in this country. That's how our democracy works, and it's how many neutral countries work as well. The triple lock is not the norm in other neutral countries as well. And the decision-making should be within the remit, in my view, and the view of government, of the government of the day and the people's representatives in Dáil Éireann, people who have been democratically elected. I do recognise, though, very much so, that in removing the UN Security Council mandate, there is a need to provide alternative safeguards to underpin the future dispatch of Defence Forces personnel. And I'm very open to, and this is why we publish draft legislation and it's why we have pre-legislative scrutiny, I'm very open to working across the House on this. So I would say that so far my thinking in relation to this is that in parallel to removing the UN mandate requirement, I have proposed that governing principles will be included in the legislation. Those already proposed in the draft bill will require that the mandate of these operations must be consistent with and adhere to the principles of the UN Charter and international law. The UN Charter is the bedrock here. And if there's a view that we need to strengthen that, I'm happy to engage in relation to that too. In assessing any request to participate in a mission, among the main considerations are its compliance with Irish law, our compliance with our foreign policy, but other elements include consent to the host nation. This is important because I've heard people talking about could this apply to not peacekeeping or peace enforcing. Consent to the host nation being required, trust, of course, in the partners in the operation operates in accordance with international law, and that the operation is consistent with the UN Charter. In evaluating proposals to join an operation, consideration of the legal framework, rules of engagement, concept of operations also forms the basis of deliberations. I would also like to highlight the current legal framework that applies for EU military missions. Under Article 21 of the Treaty of the European Union, the Union's action shall be guided by the principles of democracy, the rule of law, universality, indivisibility of human rights, fundamental freedoms, respect for human dignity, the principles of equality and solidarity, and respect for the principles, again, of the United Nations Charter and international law. So during the drafting processes, these principles will be further refined to make sure we provide legal effect to them. And I would welcome any further suggestions on safeguards from the committee and indeed from individual members. And I do look forward to the pre-legislative scrutiny report of the Committee on Defence and National Security. I wish to underline again that the proposed amendments to the legislation are in keeping with Ireland's values and policies of being militarily unaligned, being militarily neutral. These changes do not do anything to or wish to do anything to undermine that policy. As the House is aware, Ireland's policy of military neutrality is characterised by non-membership of military alliances or common or mutual defence arrangements, which is set out in the Constitution. And these legislative proposals have no effect on the constitutional provision.
And in answer to just the first couple of mentions there, I mean, certainly you mentioned hypocrisy around where the calling for humanitarian naval action in Gaza, which of course is not covered by the triple lock anyway, so that's not an issue. And again, you've mentioned the triple lock not being the norm in other neutral countries, and once again I say that they have not had the same journey to neutrality that we have had. They didn't have the same engagement with the Nice and Lisbon treaties, which required us to enshrine the triple lock for that purpose. But back to the main point of the question today, which is around the human rights monitoring. And I welcome the principles you've outlined, the mention of consent, for example, for nations. They are great principles. They are not monitoring. They absolutely are not active monitoring. The only organisation that does that active monitoring is the UN. So the other organisations you mentioned as well, again, do not have that primary purpose of peacekeeping, do not therefore apply the same level of human rights monitoring. And even the UN Charter, which you mentioned, you're not talking about applying it by the letter, you're talking about the principles, which once again falls short of that human rights monitoring. And I welcome, as you said, the opportunity to engage with this.
Tánaiste, look, we're going to have a fair few engagements in relation to this. You talked to us just in relation to suggestions. Look, my simple suggestion would be, you know, if there's a lack of clarity that needs to be provided, I'm not all that convinced that it was necessary, but if there was a necessity for clarification in relation to humanitarian evacuation, drug interception, or rescue of civilians, just legislate for that. That's my suggestion. I think as far as the Irish people are concerned, we do peacekeeping with the UN. The UN isn't perfect, but we do peacekeeping with the UN. We don't do peacekeeping with NATO. We don't do peacekeeping with other organisations. In my view, that is the standard that offers us the highest level of international law, of confidence. The legislation also provides, and I'd like you to respond to this, one of the bases on which Irish troops can be deployed is on the basis of strengthening international security. I'm sure you'll agree that is very
Margaret,
broad.
I have to-
So can you tell us a bit
Margaret.
more about what you have in mind with that?
Tánaiste.
Yeah, so look, firstly, and thank you for the constructive engagement. So I definitely didn't use the word hypocrisy, and I know the depth of feeling that people have in relation to Gaza. I know that. I'm just making the point that there's an inconsistency, I think was the word I used, in relation to, because I don't want to use a loaded phrase, because I have huge respect for people who are highlighting the situation in Gaza quite rightly. But I'm just making the point that we're living in a world that is so turbulent, we can no longer rely on international partners to necessarily provide sanctions. We can't even get the UN Security Council to agree a motion in relation to Gaza. And that's the point that I'm making in terms of the level of dysfunctionality around the veto that currently exists. I actually take very seriously the points Deputy Gibney makes, and I appreciate her professional background and expertise in these areas, and I am happy to work constructively on this issue. I mean, we have a clear difference in relation to triple lock. I respect that difference, and it's clear we're not going to resolve that difference. But if government intends to do what the government does intend to do, I think it's legitimate that you ask about the safeguards, the human rights monitoring, and I'm happy to engage in how we can strengthen that and try to address that in legislation. You are right. I did reference principles of the UN Charter is the fundamental grounding here, and we are very much open to looking at how we can refine that, strengthen that, and give that legal effect. And I will constructively engage with any recommendations that come from the Oireachtas committee in the pre-legislative report regarding that. To Deputy O'Leary, firstly, I genuinely welcome the point you make at the start in relation to being happy to legislate to provide greater clarity, because this bill is looking to do a number of things, and actually all is not the triple lock, and I think that's the point you're making. So we are looking to reform and change the triple lock, absolutely, but we are also looking to do other things that are separate and distinct to the triple lock that I think provides clarity for our people in relation to rules around deployment in terms of rescuing Irish citizens from abroad, as one example. So I welcome your constructive support on that. I do think, and I would just say you pick one element of the draft bill there, it does have to all be read in the round. I mean, we're very clearly saying in the draft legislation that people could only be deployed in relation to things like where there's the active consent of the host country and the likes. But in terms of keeping international security, there's absolutely no doubt our troops in Lebanon are helping to keep the security of Lebanon right now.
Margaret, Tánaiste and Seachta Gibney.
Margaret. And thanks, Tánaiste. I mean, I would say in response to the dysfunctionality you've described within the UN, this is exactly the time for us to recommit to our engagement with the UN to help to resolve the difficulties that we're experiencing at Security Council level, and as we've been at pains to point out throughout this debate, and will continue to do so, the triple lock can be satisfied by the UN General Assembly, and I had answers from the officials of the Department of Defence to that effect, which confirmed that indeed the General Assembly can satisfy it. And the same thing, of course, was put out in the literature in the Lisbon and Nice treaties. Some of the spokespeople from the government will talk about the difficulty that might present, but again, exactly the time to commit to that and make sure that we work within the UN structures rather than step away from it at this crucial time of volatility on our globe. And thank you for your engagement on the human rights monitoring. We will be bringing forward suggestions on how we can satisfy
Margaret,
that.
Tánaiste and Seachta O'Leary.
Yeah, what I would say in relation to a lot of what is being talked about in terms of the kind of safeguards and so on, the difficulty with it is that ultimately who will be the arbiter of that? And the arbiter of that will be the government of the day, which will be the self-same government that intends to deploy the troops. So, I mean, that does create a difficulty. If a government is so motivated to deploy troops and they're the people who are being asked to evaluate, what we have at the minute, I understand the arguments that you have made in relation to the UN Security Council. It seems to me that it is a sovereign act by a sovereign parliament to decide that this is the threshold. We have decided that this is the test. And the parliament here, we set tests for numerous areas of public policy. And sometimes we ask other organisations to do that. We ask the Low Pay Commission to set tests as to what is an appropriate method of determining low pay. So we do ask outside bodies at times where we trust that they have a certain standard to be an arbiter. You're going to be the arbiter. That's fundamentally what is proposed in the legislation.
So two things. So firstly, the courts arbitrate on our law, Irish courts, and so they're the arbitrator of any law passed in here, and the ensuring that a government of the day, any government of any hue, you might be in government one day, ensuring that any government of any hue keeps within the laws of the land as passed by the Oireachtas are arbitrated on by the Irish courts, not any government. So there is an arbitrator, and it's our court system. You are right. I mean, the test today in relation to whether we can deploy peacekeepers is the UN Security Council. My contention is that's now the wrong test and that we need to change the test. And you've referenced things like external bodies and the Low Pay Commission and all that, but like the government of the day and the Oireachtas appoints people to the Low Pay Commission. Like we have a situation where the geopolitical situation has evolved significantly over the last several years, extraordinarily rapidly in the last number of years, where the idea now that a UN Security Council where we have the likes of Russia who could end up vetoing things, threatening to veto things, is really serious. And what I want to know is, I suppose, what would we do, and I touch wood and hope this doesn't happen, but we have brave men and women in Lebanon today. You're right, they're serving under a UN mandate. We all support them fully. I've visited them, they're doing a great job. What if the UN doesn't renew that mandate? Would it be the view of the opposition that those peacekeepers should come home? Even though it's my view and the view of the Oireachtas, I think, and the view of the overwhelming majority of people that they're doing an incredible job. But what if Donald Trump or Vladimir Putin or pick any one of the permanent members, the leaders, what if they decide, nah, we're trying to save a bit of money this year. We're not as committed to multilateralism. The Elon Musk review, though I don't think they're talking at the minute, has decided we need to pull back further our funding to the UN. Are they going to decide whether the men and women in Voglig na HÉireann have to come home from southern Lebanon? That's not what I think should happen.
Bogam muid roi cigin cé ceistile an ceise trí an anam an teachtú léir.
Clara Margaret, Tánaiste has discussed the issues in relation to the safety measures or lack thereof that potentially existed in terms of Air Corps aircraft maintenance personnel over the course of recent decades. During our last discussion, there were two, I suppose, broad areas that we discussed. One is the court-related issues, and just to flag, in response to the points you made last time, a number of people have said that the engagement with the State's Claims Agency is not anything like it should be, but even separate like that, the need for a policy-orientated response from the Department.
So look, in fairness, Deputy O'Leary, he put me on notice that he's going to raise this issue on each and every occasion, and quite rightly and understandably, considering the seriousness of it. So let me say a few things. As I've said out previously, and as I am also obliged, I suppose, to set out every time this question is posed to me, I'm somewhat limited, despite the constructive way in which the questions put forward, that any discussions we might seek to have, any comments I make, are necessarily limited in light of the ongoing litigation in respect to this matter currently being before our courts. I have set out that position in this House previously, so there is a limit to what I can say in the circumstances in order to avoid intrusion into the independent role of our courts in respect of these matters. The issue of alleged exposure to chemicals in the Air Corps is, as the Deputy says, subject of a number of litigation cases, the management of which has been statutorily delegated to the State's Claims Agency. I do, though, wish to advise Deputy O'Leary, while remaining faithful to the limitations that I've set out, my officials have, at my request and following on from our discussions, started to develop preliminary options and have begun a process of the consideration in relation to any possible actions that may inform the general position of those who allege experiencing harm arising from potential chemicals. The initial exercise is underway, it's exploratory, and it does arise from my undertaking to the Deputy during previous oral PQ sessions. I don't want to go into too many specifics at this point, and this is primarily because a considerable portion of the nature and scope of any proposal will need to take account of what can be done without cutting across the current litigation cases and agreeing these limits and appropriate consultation. I would, though, this is not in my prepared answer, but I would be very happy to have a briefing with the Deputy in relation to this and ask my officials to sit down and hear your views and thoughts on this, because there is, as I've said, a challenge in relation to meeting individual people perhaps, but perhaps we could have my officials engage with you in relation to some of your own thoughts on this, because I know they are working to try and make progress. I do want to again draw the Deputy's attention to the point I made during our previous discussion on the matter, that there is an ongoing process of engagement between the State Claims Agency and current plaintiffs, and that I did ask that this be given time and space, and I'd be interested in what you're hearing in relation to that engagement.
Yeah, just on that point, and I understand that there's restrictions on what you can respond to me, but a former member of the Air Corps, a former personnel who was part of the aircraft maintenance. Just to be clear, there is no current active engagement between the State Claims Agency and litigants, despite what the Minister claimed in the Dáil last week. Nobody from the SCA has talked to any survivors since before the settlement of a particular case recently. So I'm asking you to take that away. I know there's limits on what you can say back to me, but I'm asking you to take that away and put that to the State Claims Agency, that there isn't engagement. But even aside from that, and what you said to me, I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that options are being looked at. In terms of and I think I have another opportunity here again. It's like, in terms of what we should be looking at, like, it seems to me clear. It's like there are obviously things that need to be worked out, but one of the most fundamental things is a health review, a review and analysis of health outcomes, and subsequent to that or related to that, ensuring that people are not out of pocket because of the healthcare situation that they found themselves in.
Tánaiste.
So firstly, I will very much take away the point you made and that you read out there in relation to a lack of engagement, because my note tells me that there's an ongoing process of engagement, and clearly both can't be factually true. So I will personally undertake to clarify that with the State Claims Agency, and happy to revert to the Deputy. As I say, my officials have begun an exploratory process to consider what options may be available to me from a policy point of view to consider this issue further. And without straying too far, I mean, where my thinking is at is this. There are legal cases. I'd like all of these resolved in so far as they can be in a constructive manner. But legal cases always require cause and effect, and being able to prove cause and effect. Regardless of that threshold, if there are people in our country that have health needs, there are examples in the past where we've endeavoured to meet those health needs, separate and distinct to any legal process, and trying to establish cause and effects that people have every right to try to do. And they're the two separate issues that I'm trying to grapple with. And I do think of times in the past, without any admissions of liability, the state has taken actions to try and meet the health needs of some of its people. And that's, I think, something we should explore.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that is in the area that we need to be looking at. I think there's potentially more than that, but that is one of the crucial areas. And I would say that not only here, in relation to other sectors or other categories of people who have had wrongs inflicted on them, and sometimes it's difficult, you know, to put them all through the courts for a variety of reasons, but also internationally. Like, I mean, I have brought this up with you before, that in Australia, in the Netherlands, some of the response in relation to aircraft maintenance personnel, because this is an issue, the self-same issue has arisen elsewhere, has been in terms of the healthcare side of things. On what you've talked about, on exploring options, I have two questions. The first is, what kind of timescale are we looking at? I would welcome the opportunity to have a briefing with yourself and some of your officials, but I would also say that it would hardly be appropriate if it was simply members of this House that had that opportunity. I think some representative organisations, I know there's the Air Corps Chemical Abuse Survivors organisation, there are potentially other organisations, and I expect that it would be only right that at some stage in this process that they would have the opportunity to have an engagement.
Yeah, look, when the time is right and when the advice is to me that it's appropriate for me to have meetings, I'm very happy to engage. I obviously have you in a separate and distinct category as the opposition spokesperson on defence for the largest opposition party, and I'm happy to engage with you to see if we can constructively make progress. I will ask that we look, and I have already, at the examples in other jurisdictions that you've referenced in this House. I don't have an exact timeline in relation to this. I'm informed there's significant complexities in relation to this, but perhaps at a meeting and a briefing we could tease through some of this in a bit more detail, and then of course return to this no doubt at the next PQ session as well.
Tánaiste, I wanted to raise with you, like some of the other speakers this morning, the issue of the airdrome at Baldonnell and the problems that have manifested themselves in respect to the air traffic controller problem. We note that we've had problems with the air traffic control on 3 occasions since 2010, and that there was a report done internally in 2021, and it doesn't appear to have been acted on in a meaningful way to date. I know you've made some announcements yesterday in this regard, but I suppose my concern in relation to it is that, you know, we have support flights for Garda Síochána and air ambulance services that are being missed out on as a result of the service not operating fully as it should.
Yeah, well, thanks very much to Deputy Broadbent for raising this issue, and he's right. I mean, there have been real challenges in terms of pinch points regarding specific positions that our Air Corps are fundamentally reliant on, and the air traffic controllers is the most obvious and current example. I would point out, in fairness to my predecessors in this role, that I suppose the context has even changed significantly since that 2021 report, because you've seen an increase in commercial activity in terms of other opportunities for air traffic controllers in Ireland, and you've also seen a global and growing global shortage of air traffic controllers. And I suppose both of those things have added to what was already a challenge, absolutely, back in 2021. But we have taken, I think, big and significant decisions this week, and myself and Minister Chambers agreed to go ahead with the service commitment scheme for air traffic controllers, an extension of a scheme that's available to pilots in the Air Corps, extending that to ATCs. As I pointed out in answer to an earlier question, it's unusual to do that outside of kind of regular process, for want of a better phrase, but the reason we're doing it is a recognition, as you rightly say, of the importance, the fundamental importance of Baldonnel, not just to Baldonnel, but actually to our country, to our security, and of course to our Air Corps as well. I also want to say to Deputy Brabazon that my own department is investing some €50 million in national defence infrastructure this year, with a further £12.5 million being provided to the Defence Forces on a fully delegated basis, and this will mean specifically in relation to casement at Baldonnel, the following projects at a cost of some €5.8 million have been completed in recent years: new redeployable modular accommodation, an upgrade to Hangar 3, main technical stores refurbishment, a water mains upgrade, and in addition to this, there's now planning underway in relation to a new barrack services store, a new accommodation building, a new gym, a new crash rescue building, an upgrade to Building 12, a new ATC tower, and I'm very much looking forward to visiting Baldonnel shortly, because my department has recently completed the development of an airside master development plan to further development casement airside.
Gurmagat a Tánaiste Hachta.
I welcome all the additional promised investment in the Air Corps service, and in particular, I would just like to point out that we had the Garda Commissioner in at the Justice Committee earlier on in the week, and he pointed out that one of the main methods for tackling the scrambler scourge that we have in the city is by deploying the Garda helicopter, which operates principally out of casement, and in circumstances where it's only operational half the week, his hands must be severely curtailed in that regard. So whatever we can do to get this problem resolved at the earliest opportunity needs to be done. Gurmagat.
No, I fully agree with you, Deputy, and what I would say is this: I mean, my own department and the Defence Forces themselves have been working in very close collaboration with the Gardaí, with the Health Service, and of course with the Air Corps itself, to make sure that contingency arrangements are in place while we're resolving this pinch point. Now, I do want to say this. I mean, I had a very good meeting. We have an excellent new Chief of Staff at the Defence Forces, Rossa Mulcahy. I wish him well in his role. I had an excellent meeting with him, with the leadership of the Air Corps, with my own management board in the Department of Defence. There's a list of things that need to be done here, as you say, arising from the 2021 report and even beyond that. The big ask of government was the service commitment scheme. We did it this week. We did it at Cabinet. We've taken the decision. We've provided the funding. That's now available. They believe, they being the Air Corps management, that will make a big difference. There's also a number of other recommendations operationally that fall to the Defence Forces leadership, and they now need to get on with them as well. This has to be a real collaborative effort to put all of the pieces in place to build a sustainable service. But I do want to reassure those who watch in on these debates that there are contingency plans in place, including ones to support the Gardaí in their excellent work too.
Tánaiste Hachta.
Tánaiste, I welcome what your last contribution, and look forward to seeing the fruits being delivered.
Gurmagat a Hachta, Bogamaid Roig, Keshniel, agus Kay Keshnan, and Chachta Khan.
Tánaiste, as you're aware, the report on the Commission for the Defence Forces proposed the development of a national maritime security strategy, and I hear this morning very welcome news that a public consultation process on the development of the strategy has been opened this morning. So the Tánaiste might provide us with further information as to how the strategy will develop from here, how it will evolve towards its completion, and maybe a time frame around when we see the strategy will be completed and ready to be enacted. Thank you.
I want to thank Deputy Connolly for highlighting this really important matter, the need to have Ireland's first ever maritime security strategy. I heard it said this morning that we'll have a new maritime security strategy in place by the end of the year. We will, but we'll also actually have Ireland's first ever maritime security strategy. So I thank Deputy Connolly for raising this important issue. So today, I'm launching a public consultation on Ireland's first ever national maritime security strategy. The purpose of this strategy is to map out our country's approach to maritime security over the next 5 years and to have a particular focus on dealing with emerging threats and vulnerabilities and protecting our subsea infrastructure. The public consultation will run for 4 weeks, and I'm inviting individuals and groups with interest to make that submission. The intention is to have a new maritime security strategy approved and published before the end of this year. We are an island nation. We're an island nation with one of the largest sea areas in Europe, and it's absolutely vital that we have a robust and effective maritime security strategy in place. I think this strategy would be crucial to assessing any potential threats and vulnerabilities. And as I say, we do need to have a particular focus on protecting our undersea infrastructure as well. So I'd really invite the many people who have an interest in this area, the many people who have expertise in this, to make their views known, bring forward their ideas on how we can put in place a strategy that will ensure we really take the critical opportunity to have a new and a robust approach to safeguarding our waters. And I do hope we can have an open, constructive dialogue in relation to getting this strategy right in the time ahead as well. It is the first strategy of its kind. We do need to prioritise the risks and the threats that we face in our maritime domain, and also then include a plan to address the most urgent and immediate concerns.
I suppose the Tánaiste has outlined very well the potential threats that exist to our subsea cable infrastructure and other aspects of our maritime domain which require addressing and which require this strategy. One other recommendation that came from the report of the Commission of the Defence Forces was that the powers required by the Naval Service for effective enforcement in support of national security in the maritime domain should be addressed, as there appears to be some inconsistency between pieces of legislation in this area. And I'm just wondering if the Tánaiste has any plans to address that issue. There seems to be an inconsistency between the Sea Fisheries and Maritime Jurisdiction Act and the Maritime Security Act 2004, the Maritime Safety Act 2005. And I'm just wondering, is there the necessity for a consolidating piece of legislation in this area? One further recommendation of the Commission of the Defence Forces Tánaiste was for the development of a base for the Naval Reserve in Galway. And I think this should form part of this strategy. The west coast between Limerick and Donegal really has no coastal cover in terms of maritime defence forces, and I think a naval base in Galway would be very appropriate.
Thank you very much. And Tilly Cahir, I probably agrees with you, but thanks very much. Thank you very much, Deputy Connolly, for highlighting this. So a couple of things in this. I mean, firstly, yes, you're right. The Commission of the Defence Forces does say exactly what you say it says, and I'll bring forward either over the summer or early in the autumn the next iteration of the implementation plan for the Commission on the Future on the Defence Forces, and we will take forward more recommendations. We're also looking at a new national security plan for Ireland more broadly, and the purpose of that, coordinated by the Department of the Taoiseach, is to ensure that there are no silos or, as you say, overlapping pieces of legislation, and the maritime situation can also be considered in that context. On the issue of the naval base, I'll speak directly to the Defence Force leadership and get their sense in relation to that, but there will absolutely be a need for more naval bases in our country. Of that, there is no doubt. I just want to say, finally, in the time available to me, getting this strategy right is so important. I mean, we live in a country where around 78% of our energy needs are imported on ships or via pipelines. Around 90% of our trade is transported by the sea, and 95% of international data and voice transfers are routed through our undersea fibre optic cables, and the majority of transatlantic data passes through the cables situated in Ireland's economic exclusive zone.
And I welcome that you will engage with the Defence Forces personnel regarding the reserve for the naval defence in Galway. As I said, there is very little coastal coverage for naval defence forces between Limerick and Donegal. It's quite a wide area. Some of the subsea cables that you refer to come into the country through Galway, including some of the transatlantic ones, and indeed north of Galway as well. I think there is a cable that comes in County Mayo. And Galway already, of course, has Defence Forces personnel within the city. We have as you visited, I think twice since your appointment, the Dooney Lisa in Renmore, the army barracks there. So I think that in terms of the recommendations of the Commission of the Defence Force, this recommendation for a base for the Naval Reserve in Galway is a prudent one, and it's one that would fit well into the development of the National Maritime Security Strategy and the development of a National Security Plan.
Yeah, no, Deputy Connolly, I hear you, and I hear you loud and clear in relation to it and the compelling case that you make, and I will talk to the Naval Service directly and the Chief of Staff in relation to our plans regarding the expansion of naval bases for our country. And yeah, I'm proud to acknowledge, as you've acknowledged, the great tradition that Galway has in terms of its contribution to Óglaigh na hÉireann, and I've had the honour of visiting Renmore, as you say, on 2 occasions, and to see the very proud sense that there is in Galway of the contribution that Renmore and our Defence Forces based there have made as well. It's a fact that I always like to recall. We live in a country where around 80% of our population live in coastal counties. We have a small geographic landmass. We have a massive amount of ocean around us, and we're duty bound for our own people, and we're duty bound more broadly in terms of the geopolitical, geosecurity area to take this really, really seriously. I want to get the maritime security strategy right. I want to have it in place by the end of the year, and very much welcome constructive submissions. Thanks, Deputy.
Mágad Tánaiste, Ceisiile in Anam Seachta Pro.
Gordon Margaret, you've addressed it earlier on, Minister, but the greatest challenge of our Defence Force is the constant drain of skilled technicians. It's seriously hindering our operational capabilities, especially in the Navy where ships are tied up at dock. Will you commit to establishing a specific review body tasked with examining how we can stem the flow of knowledge and training out of our military?
Gur mágad Tánaiste a Tánaiste.
So a phrase I mightn't use too often, but I think you're right, Deputy Crowe. I think there's a real issue here that you've rightly challenged. We have made very good progress in relation to recruitment and retention in the Defence Force. We have a lot more to do. But your question does get to the heart of the fact that even what those statistics that I can quote off belies or ignores is that there are real pinch points in relation to certain technical skills that our Defence Forces require. And what we're seeing in relation to those specialist personnel is how quickly, if you lose those numbers, it can cause you real operational difficulties, as we've been discussing this morning in relation to casement, but we've also discussed in relation to other parts of the Defence Forces. So thank you for putting this question down. Since my appointment as Minister for Defence earlier this year, my initial focus has been on stabilising the numbers of Defence Force personnel and facilitating capacity in the system for further increases. I'm determined that we achieve real progress on the issue. I've been very clear with the Chief of Staff of our ambitions in relation to this. Challenges undoubtedly exist, particularly in relation to the recruitment and retention of specialist personnel, as you've referenced. And this specific challenge is presently felt by employers across our economy, really, at a time when we have full employment. We have introduced a number of measures in recent years to try and make progress in relation to recruitment and retention of the Defence Forces. There has been significant progress in pay. We shouldn't forget that. Recruits on completion of training now start at €41,465 in year one. This represents an increase of 49% over 6 years, and school leaver cadets upon commissioning earn €45,341 whilst in full-time education, and the pay of graduate cadets now commences at €50,667. A further pay increase of 1% is due under the current pay agreement in August, and a number of additional pay-related items are being negotiated as part of local bargaining arrangements. An increase in recruitment age to 39 for those roles that have had a recruitment age below that, and to 50 years for direct entry specialists have been brought in. The mandatory retirement age has been increased to 62. Private secondary healthcare has been rolled out to all members of the Permanent Defence Forces, and the provisions of the Working Time Directive have now been extended across the Defence Forces, subject to certain exemptions.
Yeah, be it pay, conditions, pensions, dare I say, accommodation, there must be something we can do to compete with the private sector. So I think the review body, if it's established, given the terms of reference, do a deep dive, show us the levers that can be used to make the Defence Force an attractive career, not just one of getting trained up and by some of the best instructors this day. Can I say also that I welcome the initiative around the air traffic controllers. It shouldn't be a one-off. We need to look right across the services, but it's something that can be done, it should be done, and it needs to be done.
No, look, I agree with you, and what I'm basically saying today is I have a very open mind on your question, in the sense that I do believe we're going to need to do something in this space, and I am considering what the best structure to put in place to look at this is, because I think if we just talk about recruitment and retention in general in relation to the Defence Forces, I hope and think we'll be able to make more progress. We've made some last year, I think we'll make more this year. But your point about the deep dive into the specialist areas, the pinch points, and how we're doing as a Defence Forces at a time where the country has full employment, these people are highly skilled. It's not an issue really to recruit them, but it is an issue to retain them. And the service commitment scheme, as you say, we brought in for the air traffic controllers is good, but that's one area. There are other pinch points, including in the naval service too. Now, we have local bargaining structures that is meant to advance some of this, but I am very open to considering with colleagues in government, is there a better way of doing a deep dive? I intend to give some consideration to this with my officials over the summer months, and I'll come back to you in the autumn on my thinking on it.
Mágad Tánaiste.
Yeah, well, I welcome the fact that you're going to look at it. I think we've seen the strains in different elements of the different services. The ships not being able to. It's clear, it's not just happening in Ireland; it's happening right across the world. that the services are facing these challenges. But welcome the fact that you're suggesting that you will look at this over the summer months and come back to us in the autumn. But it's something that needs to be. If there's common agreement across government, I think it needs to be established sooner rather than later. And look forward to your report in the autumn. Thank you.
No, thanks very much. Look, as I say, we have objectively made good progress on pay. I mean, to see a 49% increase in the pay for a recruit entering the Defence Forces, entering their training, to be 49% higher now than it was 6 years ago, and quite rightly so. To see somebody being able to work as a school leaver, be in full-time education and be earning €45,341, and then seeing graduate cadets now commencing on 50,000, to be extending access to healthcare, to be bringing in the working time directive, increasing the mandatory retirement age, increasing the recruitment age, bringing in the patrol duty allowance payable to the naval service, the decision we've taken this week on the air traffic controllers, a new naval service tax credit extended for a further 5 years. There is good things that have been done in addition to the extensive education and training opportunities provided to all personnel. There's no doubt there's more that needs to be done, and I will explore with government colleagues and with my civil and military management teams how we can look further at this, and indeed if we need to bring in potential use of external expertise to inform this work. Thank you.
Panama ceistlis an glas tríroch agus an cinenne atá déanta fáil réilis. My question relates to the triple lock, and I would ask you to just to outline as clearly as you can the basis on which the decision was taken to legislate for the removal of the triple lock. And if you could outline that in a rational way for me, I'd be very interested. Thank you.
The first thing I'd say, and I will outline the policy rationale, the first thing I'd say is the electoral commitment. I promised the people of Ireland when I ran in a general election that if I was elected to government, I intended to do this. And I intend to keep my promises. It was in my party's manifesto. I think it was in our partner's party manifesto. It's in the programme for government, and we intend to act on it. We put it before the people as a proposition in our manifesto, and we are in government with a mandate from the people, and I intend to deliver on that mandate. Under the UN Charter, the UN Security Council has primary responsibility for maintenance of international peace and security. And shame on them, by the way, for not being able to even pass a motion on Gaza in recent days. It's not working. It's letting the world down. It's letting the people of Gaza down. As this House will be aware, the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council can use their veto power to prevent the Security Council from taking decisions, including taking decisions in relation to the mandate for peace operations. We've seen this illustrated most recently, as I said last week, where a UN Security Council resolution simply calling for an unconditional ceasefire in Gaza was vetoed. In practice, even the threat of a veto by a permanent member, rather than its actual use, is often enough to prevent the Council from taking any action at all. We've seen this on many occasions in the recent past, including in relation to Ukraine, as well as in relation to the Middle East. This untenable situation has led the government to the decision that we need to change the legislation that governs how we dispatch our defence forces overseas. The current programme for government clearly sets out the government's intention to reform the triple lock legislation, and I wish to underline that it is intended to be done whilst also ensuring that amendments to the legislation are in keeping with our values and policy of military neutrality. And I want to reiterate, as I did earlier in this House, we want to work with people on that. We have vastly different views on the triple lock. I respect that difference. But I do want the legislation to actually look at how we can ensure that we're keeping with our values and policy of military neutrality. It cannot be emphasised enough. We have no desire to alter our policy of military neutrality. The proposed amendments to the legislation, I believe, are in keeping with Ireland's values and policies in this regard. And as the House is aware, Ireland's policy of military neutrality is characterised by the non-membership of military alliances or common or mutual defence arrangements. These legislative proposals have no effect on this policy. Having regard to the current ineffectiveness of the UN Security Council and indeed the outcome of the Consultative Forum on International Security in June 2023, the Government approved the proposals to bring forward the general scheme of the Defence Amendment Bill to govern overseas deployments in the future. The proposed changes will ensure that our legislation is fully up to date, is fit for purpose, and by making the changes proposed, we'll be removing the veto power of Security Council members over Ireland's international engagement, thereby allowing us, in my view, to reinforce our sovereignty and have this government and this Dáil make a decision to dispatch our defence forces overseas. To address the question, because these questions are grouped in relation to Deputy O'Rourke, and to clear up any misconceptions, the bill proposes to amend the legislation on how Ireland deploys its troops overseas, both in terms of deploying on peace operations as part of an international force, but also in terms of the deployment of Defence Force personnel overseas for purposes other than as part of an international force. And these include, for example, evacuation operations of Irish citizens abroad, something which has sadly become more frequent due to the volatile geopolitical situation. These provisions, I want to say, are separate to the triple lock provisions. And I think I do want to say that. There's people in this House who vehemently oppose the removal of the triple lock who are in favour of some of those provisions. So I don't wish to conflate them. They shouldn't be conflated. I think they got a little bit conflated at the pre-leg. There are separate provisions here. There's the triple lock provisions, and there's providing the clarity in relation to, for example, evacuation operations of Irish citizens. I want to be truthful and clear in relation to that. I do want to say this, and I mean it. I said it to Deputy Gibney a few moments ago. Like, I'm open to and want to refine the legislation. Pre-legislative scrutiny isn't just something we kind of go through and tick a box. How we actually make this legislation have the safeguards that members of this House want, that I want to make sure, how we make sure that the UN Charter, which we value, the UN Charter is at the heart of all that we do, how we look at things like human rights monitoring. These are all good things that we should do. We have produced in the draft legislation guiding principles around, being welcomed by the host country and the likes. Let's look at do people think they're robust enough as well? So there's a scrutiny process underway. I think it's expected to last around 8 weeks, and following the conclusion of this, it is intended that we will draft a bill to go to government for approval, and I hope to bring it through the various stages of the Oireachtas. I will want to provide ample opportunity to scrutinise and debate the content of the bill and to work constructively. And what I would ask is that we don't reduce every conversation to what, and I'm not saying no one's done this morning, but what about military neutrality? Because there are militarily neutral countries, quite a number of them, that have no triple lock. So there are many, 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 many ways you can be a militarily neutral country and not have a triple lock. People in Ireland, including me, have a deep love of our military neutrality. We want to be militarily unaligned. The people of Ireland, I'm clear, have an overwhelming desire for that. I also think, though, they get it in terms of the need to reform the current structures that are in place. And I said this earlier, I just want to say it again in the time available to me. We have troops in Lebanon today doing brilliant work, amazing work. The longest unbroken commitment to peacekeeping. I'm very proud that they're doing that under a UN mandate. What is the view of those opposed to these changes if that mandate isn't renewed this autumn? Is it the view that no matter what alternative, and by the way, there's no discussions on this, but hypothetically, is it if Donald Trump or Vladimir Putin or anybody else decides for whatever reason we're not renewing the mandate at the UN Security Council, is it the view that Irish peacekeepers should not continue their excellent work in Lebanon? It's not my view, but is it the view of the House? And I say that to be constructive, because these are the real live things we may have to tease our way through in the time ahead.
Time do I have, Chairperson? A minute, okay. Obviously, I can't respond to the Tánaistes 5 or 6 minutes in a minute. But certainly, you made many promises. We've had promises in Nice, we've had promises in Lisbon. Separately, we've promises to end the housing crisis, and many, many solemn promises that you haven't fulfilled. So as to stand up here to say you're going to fulfill a promise, it's not the question I asked. The question I asked, what was the basis for leading to this decision? I would have thought somewhere there's a document that sets out these are the problems. And the continuous referral to the difficulty with the veto has always been framed in terms of the Russian veto being used. Even today, and this is your third occasion to speak on this, you talk about the recent decision of the failure of the UN in relation to calling for the ceasefire, and you fail to call out who used the veto. America used the veto. So you talk about hypothetical situations which you've told us in the past you don't like to talk about, you like to deal in reality. Well, the reality is America used the veto to stop the ceasefire and to allow genocide to continue. Thank you.
Sorry, just to be very clear, the United States of America used the veto. No issue about that. I think I referenced the President of the United States on a number of occasions today in relation to my concern around the potential use of the veto in the future. The United States used the veto. I think it was an appalling use of the veto. And I think it's a sign of the dysfunctionality of the Security Council. And yeah, I fully agree in relation to that. I mean, Nice, Lisbon, etc. I'm talking about we ran an election. Nice and Lisbon are very important. We gave commitments in our manifesto. We did articulate these, not just in this government, but in the last government. This proposal isn't coming as a surprise to you or to anybody in this House at all. And I believe the Irish people see a very clear difference And I think we've seen this in public polling recently, a very, very clear difference between valuing military neutrality and recognising that we can have an informed discussion about how we reform and change the triple lock. I don't think the two issues are conflated, and I think this conversation about every time we try to discuss defence, security or peacekeeping being you're attacking military neutrality. We're not. We're not at all. Military neutrality isn't owned by you, the left or anybody else, it's owned by all of us. It's deeply valued across party, including my own. And we've no proposals to change military neutrality. And what I'm saying is I want to work with you to make sure the legislation is clear in relation to that. I really do. And we might have differences in terms of the proposal around the triple up, but we should seek to get that legislation right. I'm not just talking about hypotheticals, though I accept what I said in Lebanon was a hypothetical, but I have previously mentioned in this House the challenges that we've already faced in relation to the veto. And I just don't understand what the problem is in relation to actually deciding that the democratically elected people here, the people who elect you in Galway and me in Wicklow and you in Dublin, can actually make a decision that the government and the people's representatives, and by the way, we do have, Deputy O'Leary was asking me, we do have oversight structures here. Every law that is passed, we have arbitrators, it's called the courts. Our country, why would we give that sovereignty away? And I've looked at other countries, and I'm happy to discuss these when we take the legislation through. I've looked at other militarily neutral countries, ones that you wouldn't doubt at all are militarily neutral. You wouldn't question that. You couldn't question it, I wouldn't question it. And they don't have a triple lock. So this idea that it's the triple lock or no military neutrality, it genuinely doesn't objectively stand up to scrutiny. You can favour the triple lock, but it's not the same as saying the triple lock must stay or military neutrality is threatened. It really, really isn't. And there are many, many, many examples of countries that are proudly militarily neutral that don't have a triple lock. And you wouldn't suggest that they're militarily aligned. So there's a way of getting this right. And I look forward in the first instance to the report coming back from the Oireachtas Committee on Pre-Legislative Scrutiny. There have been lots. There's been an international forum that my predecessor hosted in relation to defence and security that looked at the issue of the triple lock. There's been much work done on this over quite a number of years. There are genuine different views in this House, I respect that. But there is a way of getting a piece of legislation right here that actually guards military neutrality, but also recognises that we have to have an ability to deploy peacekeeping troops that doesn't succumb to a UN Security Council veto, in my view.
Tánaiste an seachta Connolly.
Tánaiste, I don't know if you understand the Lisbon. We had to vote a second time because of people's concerns in relation to the militarisation of Europe and our concerns about neutrality. So we gave solemn declarations of whatever they were called, Nice and Lisbon. And you forced the people to vote twice. The current Taoiseach has told us that the triple lock is a fundamental part of our neutrality, the core of our neutrality. Perhaps you should talk to him about that. When did that change? And I'm actually coming back. If you're asking us to change something as fundamental as our policy of neutrality, that you would lay out in black and white what led to that decision. Which veto was used when, at what time? Which country used the veto the most? The role of America. The appalling role of America lately in voting against a ceasefire. More than ever, we need to use our voice. Earlier on, you referred to the volatile situation in the world. That's why we need to stand up, not reactively, proactively. It's difficult because there was extra time and the other, just to clarify, I'm not sure what the position is in relation to that, but there were other TDs grouped with this.
Yes, and the way it works is that each
TD do I get in
minute.
Again, or is this the end?
You know, this is the end.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know.
And that's just
no,
the way
no,
it
no.
works.
It's just unfair the way it's worked out. But I understand.
I understand, but that's the way it works. On Chapter Smith.
Thank you for having me to come in on this question. Tánaiste, I'm disappointed with how the heads of this bill have been presented, because I think there's 80–90% of what needs to be achieved in terms of our national security. I think there'd be support for a lot of it, or at least we could reach accommodations on a lot of it, whether it's extraction of our citizens from war zones. You know, you've launched a national maritime strategy today, or are launching today, which I welcome, which is much needed. But you do know that, and we've seen it, and there is an emotive element to the triple lock, which is going to envelop all these issues politically. They're going to be conflated in, and you said in your first contribution that they are separate, and they are separate, but you know the reality of political discourse in this country, and we need to have a sophisticated discussion on all elements of security, on all elements of national security, and on elements and on the triple lock. And I think they should be done separately. I don't think we need to rush into removing the triple lock as part of this legislation at all. there is a process of reform ongoing in the United Nations. I think we should be leading on that. I think we should be trying to improve the United Nations. We fundamentally, I think, believe in the United Nations, and any future of peacekeeping outside the United Nations is not something that we can take a punt on at this point. Thank you.
An teach the crow.
I think most people would link the triple lock with, you know, our relation to our foreign policy, our view on neutrality. And I suppose that a lot of people will be surprised that, you know, during the recent election campaign, you know, the government parties were very, very silent on this issue. There was no real view that, you know, you want to change this and so on. So it comes as a bit of a surprise. So, you know, to follow up from Dr. Connolly there, maybe you could, in the couple of minutes we have here today, maybe explain the rationale and the motivation to it upend the system that's effectively in place since the 1960s. So, you know, it's a huge step. No real debate, just seems to be pulled out. We're going to change it, and I suppose the big worry people have is that this is something that, you know, fundamentally part of our foreign affairs policy, and all of a sudden now it's going to change. And you'll give examples later, maybe in relation to, you know, Afghanistan and some of the challenges there. But there are other challenges that are facing us in the world today, and we need to. I think people need to have a clear debate on this.
Tánaiste.
I think people do need to have a clear debate, and I think people need to stop with the spread of misinformation. I mean, I heard the leader of Sinn Féin, Deputy Mary Lou MacDonald, talking about sending our sons to war. I mean, let's get real. I mean, there's no proposal to send anybody's son to war. So, like, there's genuine differences in relation to a policy on triple lock. Great, that's a legitimate thing to have. But we also have to be truthful in relation to this. I mean, the legislation is printed now. It's there. It's there for people to read. I'd love the Deputy to refer me to the line in the legislation that believes that we're sending anybody's son in Ireland to war. We're not. This is about peacekeeping. It's about something I'm extraordinarily proud of. I think we all are, that our peacekeepers are doing. And it's a legitimate question as to, is there a better way of doing it? I believe there is. Some people believe there is, and my way is not the right way. Some people believe the current way is fine. Grand. Let's debate that. But this idea of kind of scaremongering of we're sending people to war and we're sending people to Iraq, I mean, come on, like, I mean, that's not true. It might get kind of get the emotion going, but it isn't the factual debate we need to have. I take the point about not rushing this, Deputy Smith. I don't intend to rush this. Like, we have the pre-legislative scrutiny. The committee's doing its job well from what I can see. It'll send its report back, and we need to make sure there's ample time to scrutinise this issue as well. On the purpose of improving the United Nations, I mean, I fully agree with that. Our Taoiseach could be there next week. We're very committed to the United Nations. We're very committed to multilateralism at a time it's under attack from many sources. We're increasing our multilateral funding and support for the UN all of the time. But I think UN Security Council reform is unfortunately not likely in the near term, and there are ways that we just need to work through all of this. I do believe we can get a landing zone here that is correct, if there's a wish to do that. If there's a wish to, and not from everybody in opposition, but if there's a wish to just suggest this big bad government wants to scrap military neutrality and send your sons to war, we're not going to make any sort of progress. That is misinformation. It is disinformation. It's downright factually incorrect. This is a question about how do we effectively, appropriately deploy Irish peacekeepers to do the brilliant job that they have been doing. And there are real life examples. There's been no new peace support operation approved by the UN Security Council since 2014. Operation Althea in Bosnia is a recent example where issues arose in 2022 around the continuation of a UN Security Council mandate, where Ireland was faced with the real possibility of having to withdraw men and women from that mission as the rollover of the mandate was not immediately forthcoming. There continues to be concerns as Russia's become very critical in relation to that, and it's very possible that Russia may veto a future renewal. We've seen the EU security mission in the Mediterranean, then called Operation Sophia in 2015. Ireland couldn't participate in that for more than a year after it started because of the lack of a mandate. In 1999, a permanent member of the UN Security Council vetoed the renewal of the United Nations Preventative Deployment Force because the subsequent European Union peace operation in the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia didn't have a Security Council mandate. We couldn't participate. And in 2017, the Maritime Analysis Operations Centre, we couldn't participate.
Question in relation to the shots fired against our soldiers, peacekeeping soldiers in the Lebanon. Just wondering if you could provide a comment on that, please.
Gur Margaret, and thank you, the Deputy Smith, for raising this. Our peacekeepers in Lebanon are part of an international UN mandated force under the command of UNIFIL. They're part of Ireland's long and proud history of peacekeeping, and I know from my own recent visit to our troops in UNIFIL, they're making a really important contribution in a very challenging environment. They're acting as the international community's eyes and ears on the ground. I want to take this opportunity, and I know joining with you and everybody in this House, to again state our thanks to our personnel for the valuable service that they carry out in support of international peace and security in the region. I want to reaffirm once again that their safety and security is a matter of the highest priority for both myself as their Minister for Defence and for the Irish Government. I want to also thank their families and the sacrifices their families make too. To address the incident referred to, whilst the Irish patrol was not directly targeted by the Israeli Defence Force in the incident on the 29th of May, the firing of ammunition in the vicinity of an Irish patrol is considered extraordinarily reckless. Such actions are completely unacceptable in terms of the safety of our peacekeepers in the execution of their mandated duties. And in my view, it's simply an attempt to intimidate our peacekeepers. We saw an attempt to intimidate our diplomats relatively recently. Now we see an attempt to intimidate our peacekeepers. The incident in Yerevan was unconscionable, and I categorically condemn any endangerment of our peacekeepers. On hearing of this development, I immediately directed that my officials convey a formal démarche to both the United Nations and the Israeli mission to the United Nations in New York to express my deep concern regarding the unacceptable nature of the incident and the actions of the Israeli Defence Forces. In this regard, our permanent representative to the United Nations in New York made contact with the Under-Secretary General for Peace Operations at the UN, Jean-Pierre Lacroix, on the 30th of May, immediately after the incident. The deep and well-founded concerns of the Irish Government in relation to the incident were clearly and frankly conveyed to the UN. Also, on my instruction, our permanent mission to the UN expressed our grave concerns and anger directly to the permanent mission of Israel to the United Nations and through them to the Israeli Government. Ireland has also requested that UNIFIL formally raise these concerns as a matter of urgency with the appropriate Israeli authorities. Should any further incidents of this nature occur, we will obviously continue to do so without hesitation. Finally, I want to reassure the House that I remain in regular contact with the Chief of Staff with regard to the deployment of our personnel in UNIFIL. My department is also regularly kept appraised of all developments in those areas where Defence Forces personnel are deployed. There are robust force protection measures in place to support the security and safety of all personnel, and these measures are continually reviewed and enhanced as necessary to address any emerging threats. But we do have to be clear what's going on here. It is a constant attempt to undermine peacekeeping by the Israeli Defence Forces. And then they come out with whataboutery, that they're going to look into matters and then they're going to issue apologies. It misses the point. There needs to be accountability in relation to those who fired those shots, which are clearly an absolute breach of everybody's basic understanding of international laws and rules in relation to peacekeeping. And sadly, it's not an isolated incident, because we did see when our permanent representatives to Palestine were visiting a refugee camp, diplomats doing their duties, we saw a similar incident where shots were fired in their direction as well. And this is a pattern of intimidation by the Israeli government and the Israeli Defence Forces.
Tánaiste, and I do welcome the swift and stern diplomatic response that we had to this incident through the United Nations. But as you say, this is a pattern of behaviour. There's no sense that this pattern will stop. So if we continue to see further instances such as this, and God forbid, we're lucky that there's no injuries or indeed loss of life, but if we do see either further instances such as this or indeed an escalation, what is open to us as a state in terms of escalating actions against Israel? Will we continue to démarche through the United Nations? We know legislatively we have the OTB bill coming through the Foreign Affairs Committee, and we'll debate that in there. But what else can be done? We had a delegation meet the Foreign Affairs Committee from the Palestinian Authority, from planning, water services, senior operations people, giving an absolutely stark vista of Gaza, the West Bank, everywhere in terms of Palestine, in terms of Israel's actions. So this pattern that we're witnessing here in terms of peacekeepers is just one of a whole host of aggressive actions by Israel against the Palestinians and indeed peacekeeping.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Smith. And I believe when the representatives of Palestine and those at the Foreign Affairs Committee addressed the meeting, I believe they referred to Ireland and possibly Algeria as two of the most supportive countries of their actions, and that's maybe not articulated enough in this House. This country, this government, this Oireachtas is doing everything we possibly can and will continue to do everything we possibly can to support the people of Palestine, to support international law and to support human rights. And it was good to hear that recognised by Palestinians at the Foreign Affairs Committee as recently as this week. Yes, we'll absolutely continue to démarche, but it is a time for real, it's well beyond time, for real practical actions against the Israeli government. That's why Ireland has called for the Association Agreement review. And we have a Foreign Affairs Council meeting on Monday week. And I would really say in this House today, I hope and expect the European Commission on that occasion to bring forward a list of options in relation to what actions Europe can and should take in relation to Israel's clear breach of our association agreement. You know, it's my view, it's your view, I think it's the view of most members of this House that the agreement should be suspended because they're clearly in breach of the human rights clauses, which aren't just there for padding, and clearly in breach of human rights clauses. But in the absence of that being a decision which would require unanimity at the European Union, the very least I think we should expect is that the European Commission would present to the Foreign Affairs Council options as to immediate measures, sanctions that can be taken, because there has to be cause and effect between the breach of an agreement and action being taken by Europe. So yes, we will bring forward, and I hope to bring it to Cabinet next week, if not certainly the following week, the bill in relation to the occupied Palestinian territories. That will go to the Oireachtas Committee this month, and they can bring in their scrutiny process. We'll continue to use every avenue available to us. The Taoiseach will represent our country at the UN at the Two-State Solution Conference, which I think is next week. But I do think one of the most practical things we should all be pushing for, and we should all be pushing for through our own political groupings in Europe, is for a speedy review of the association agreement. And there's no reason, in my view, in the wider earthly world, why the European Commission shouldn't be presenting options for member states to consider in terms of the breaches that have clearly taken place, and that would be real tangible action that Europe can and should take in relation to the Israeli government.
That's interesting. I'm just wondering, is it your hope or your expectation that the Commission will bring some options into the Foreign Affairs Council meeting on Monday week? And again, just in relation to the OTB bill, which will be coming forward, I'm sure your attention has been drawn to the legal action that's been taken by a transnational group of lawyers against Airbnb in relation to it operating its services in the occupied territories. We had a briefing here in the AV room on Tuesday morning, hosted by Senator Francis Black, and there was very strong legal opinion that, you know, under a definition of trade, that we can't separate goods and services. I'm sure your attention will have been drawn to that, and in the spirit of wanting to get this bill right, and you know our position in terms of including services in it. But again, this is all about bringing tangible actions against Israel, or tangible sanctions against Israel for their actions. But it was not lost on me, as it was not lost on you or anyone else who heard it. The Palestinian people see allies all over the world. They mention Ireland and Algeria, and I don't think that should be lost on anyone either side of the House, that our actions here do make a difference to the Palestinian people. Thank you.
Look, I think it's fair to say we will be seeing continuity of that pattern of behaviour by Israel. Not surprising for an entity that engages in genocidal action, and obviously an absolute disgrace, the shooting on Irish peacekeepers and also diplomats. We know the actions we need to take, whether we're talking about the Occupied Territories Bill and we are talking about services. I'd agree with the Tánaiste. The Commission does need to take action. At the EU-Israel Association Agreement, all I can say is that is a disgrace, and we also have to find a way that we ensure that we are not facilitating the sale of Israeli war bonds by whatever means possible. Like, I had two questions. Obviously, one of them relates to Sean Rooney, and we have to see right by peacekeepers and make sure we do everything for them. I know there is a case at this point in time. I don't think you're going to be shocked at the question I'm going to ask now, and that's obviously in relation to Michael McNeela, who lost his life in the Lebanon in 1989. His mother received the pension, but then when she died, the father, John, didn't, and I think it's a case, as I say, I've spoken to you before about it, but it is something that needs to be resolved, and I know there was to be discussions between your department and Department of Social Protection about even finding an interim solution, but we do need legislation changed.
Yeah, just to get back to the idea that, you know, the Irish troops were fired on peacekeepers. It's not the first time. It's happened down through the years. It's, you know, Israeli forces, but also their proxies in that area. The fact that, you know, it's not the first time, but, you know, is it true to say that, you know, that the coordinates of the Irish troops are given to the Israeli, the so-called Israeli Defence Forces, and again, you know, that, you know, the bunkers aren't moved, and so they know that they're there for, you know, they've been there for a long, long time, so they know exactly where they are, and they know exactly what they're doing in relation to their attacks on these troops. But the point was made by one of my colleagues here yesterday, who was saying that, you know, the Israeli war bonds is being facilitated by the central bank. You know, that the rounds that were fired into the Irish peacekeepers were possibly paid by those war bonds. So it just highlights again the challenges that we're facing in relation to the conflict that's in that zone, and what we need to do. We need to be more proactive in relation to this issue.
Yeah, look, thanks. I think the Governor of the Central Bank outlined the legal and practical situation yesterday at the Central Bank, at the Oireachtas Committee, and you know, nobody wants to see anything happening that in any way provides any support, direct or indirect, to the Israeli government's horrific actions and the genocidal activity. And obviously, we have to operate within the laws of the land and the laws of Europe, but we continue to work our way through all issues. Deputy Smith asked, was it my hope or expectation, which is a very fair question. It's certainly my request. It's my request, and I think the request of quite a number of European countries. And I would think it's a legitimate expectation, but I don't yet know. But I do think, you know, the people of Ireland, the people of Europe are watching on. They're looking at the European Union. I'm a big fan of the European Union. I think it's been so great for our country, but they're looking at the European Union as a major peace project, one of the most successful peace projects in the world. Finally, the European Union majority of member states agreed to a review of an agreement, something Spain and Ireland had been seeking for more than 2 years, 3 years really. There's an onus now, I think, for the European Union to maintain credibility, for that review to be swift, and for that review to have clear consequences. And I think we should see those actions. I think we need to see that actions quite quickly. On the issue of services, like I've said it before, in relation to the occupied Palestinian territories, I'm very supportive of the policy rationale for it. I do have to get the law right, so it's likely the draft bill will be for goods, as per the commitment to the programme of government. But, very clear, and I've said this to Senator Black, we will then have the Oireachtas Committee scrutinise if it's possible to include services. I've also asked the Attorney General for updated advice in relation to that, to have advice external to my own department's legal advice, and I expect to receive that shortly. In relation to the case of Sean Rooney, Deputy America, and thank you for raising it, I want to see every support possible provided to the Rooney family. Let me just say that, and we will work our way through all of those issues. I also want to see justice for Sean Rooney, justice for his family, and we'll continue to in relation to that. I want to thank you for raising the case of Michael McNeil. In fairness, you raised it with me long before anybody else ever did. I want to thank you for doing that. I heard Michael's father, John, on the radio. You couldn't but be moved. I want to extend my deep sympathies to John on the loss of Michael. And I do think there's a legitimate policy question here. This is a very, very small number of people, one would imagine, with very particular circumstances, tragic circumstances. The engagement between my own department and other departments is ongoing, and I don't want to say more than that until I make more progress. But I'm very sympathetic and supportive to seeing if action can be found.
Mágad a Tánaiste bogam muid ará go ceiste héineag go tógáil le ceiste fiche fé trí fiche ní trícha carcha dó, seasca dó, seasca sé agus seachtaí ach an ceist in anam an Teachta Smith.
Chair, Tánaiste, just in relation to your urgent actions you and your department will take to ensure that the 505 squadron at Casement Aerodrome Baldonnel is fully staffed and will not be forced to continue to operate at 50% capacity and a reduced flying schedule.
Good mágad a Tánaiste.
Thanks very much to Deputy Smith for this question. It's a very important one because it's a very important issue. It is a critical matter. I've already set out to the House a number of immediate steps that I've taken to ensure that the restricted air traffic control service operating in Baldonnel is restored to full services. In around May, this issue was brought to the attention of my department, and it's a very frustrating issue in many ways because it shows how dependent we are on a very small number of people. And I don't cast any aspersion on them. People are perfectly entitled to move and everything else, but a very small number of people. And if a certain number of people leave a service, the whole service finds itself in a reduced capacity. We've got to move beyond that. There It was a request made of me when I brought together the Chief of Staff, the Head of the Air Corps and others, that one of the practical measures that we the government could take, is to immediately introduce the service commitment scheme. There was a view, I think it's fair to say, from military leadership that this would be a very significant, very helpful step in ensuring the retention of people in the here and now to get the service back up and running to the 24/7 basis that it needs to. We took that decision. We took that decision on Tuesday at Cabinet. It is now a government decision. The decision is made. I've conveyed it to the Chief of Staff of the Defence Forces, and they can now, for what I say respectfully, get on with it in terms of engaging with any individuals who may benefit. And I know it's something that is recognised as significant by the Air Corps. This is just one of a number of things that needs to happen, though, because I think this gets us, I certainly hope this gets us to a much better place. I hope it gets us to that place relatively rapid. But there's clearly other things that need to happen, many of which are on the operational side as well. And I've said very clearly to the Defence Forces leadership and my own leadership that we need to see a rolling series of updates on what they're doing in terms of implementing the various recommendations. So we have, as I say, introduced a service commitment scheme for air traffic control personnel. We have approved new promotion opportunities within the service. We've also are open to outsourcing of aspects of training provided. All of these individual actions are now in train. They're aimed at ensuring that both existing personnel and indeed those known to be considering leaving the service are actively incentivised to remain. And these actions build on other specific measures that have already been initiated in relation to recruitment as well. And I think it's important now that we see that action. I do want to say that it is unusual, and I hope that shows the sense of urgency we're attaching to this. It's unusual to take these steps outside of a pay process or indeed outside of local bargaining. So local bargaining was the route through which I think government and others would have originally envisaged these matters being considered. The fact that we've separated this from local bargaining highlights the critical nature of getting this matter resolved.
Tánaiste, the fact that this had to take place outside of collective agreements, I think, highlights how unusual it is, and I will acknowledge your action on this. But the reason this has happened is underpinned by a structural issue in terms of our airfields in the Dublin region, specifically Weston Aerodrome. The Irish Times have reported that we've been losing technicians to the privately owned Weston Aerodrome, which again operates the privately run Coast Guard service. It's a 10-year, €670 million public contract that is essentially underpinning Weston Aerodrome. We now know that some Garda operations are operating out of Weston as well, and we're having this brain drain from our public service from Baldonnel into Weston. So we're fighting an uphill battle because of that. I mean, we talked about manifestos earlier. In our manifesto, we don't understand why a publicly run Coast Guard service can't operate out of Baldonnel or indeed Dublin Airport as previously spoken. But that's the structural issue at play here.
It's of little good spending 2.5 billion on jet flight capability if we're operating on a 9 to 5 weekday, So can we have some assurances that full-time flight operations at Casement will be brought back online at the earliest possible opportunity? And can we also have assurances that the air ambulance service is not affected?
Yes. So yes and yes. Yes, the plan is to get the service back up and running at a 24/7 basis as quickly as possible. The exact timeline for that, being blunt, depends on the individual conversations that the Air Corps leadership are having with individual people in terms of air traffic control. Those conversations are underway, and I'm hoping for a readout and an update on that very shortly. And there are provisions in place to ensure the continuance of the emergency air ambulance as well, which I think is based in Athlone generally too. I don't want to be pedantic because the service isn't operating at full capacity in terms of hours, but it is operating 8 to 8, just as opposed to 9 to 5. So it is operating from 8 to 8 as the current operational hours, with contingency arrangements in place outside of those hours as well. Deputy Smith is correct, and I won't get into specifics around any individual commercial enterprise other than to say it is factually true to say that there's been an increase in commercial activity in this area even since the 2021 report was carried out. So we're operating in an environment where we have a global shortage of air traffic controllers and increased, let's say, commercial competition for air traffic controllers as well. And that was those two factors, I think, were decisive in saying that we need to go ahead with the service commitment scheme in the here and now to make sure that working in the Air Corps, as well as it being a huge commitment to the security of our state and our public service, is also sustainable for people who have families and mortgages and lives, like everybody else. I do think, and we had an earlier question from Deputy Crowe on this, I do think it raises a broader issue about those pinch points where there's specialist personnel, significantly qualified, who are very happy to join the Air Corps, very proud to serve, but after a number of years, other opportunities present themselves, and as human nature, people can obviously be attracted to them too. So I do think we're going to have to do a deep dive, rather than kind of whack-a-mole, it's this today and this tomorrow, in terms of those pinch points around specialist personnel, and I'm considering bringing in external expertise to advise in relation to that too.
Gurmargaret and Charles Smith.
That's encouraging, but again, when commercial interests are impacting on key critical public services, such as what should be operating out of Baldonnel, then the state needs to act and look at those structural problems. And one of them is that Coast Guard contract. It's been well debated here and in committee in the last Dáil, and will be again, where we have nearly €750 million of public funds, underpinning a commercial enterprise, or helping to underpin a commercial enterprise at the expense of Baldonnel. That is something that will need to be looked at. But I accept, and I think you accept, that this can't be done in, as you put it, a whack-a-mole kind of scenario. It has to be done strategically. But this has highlighted a structural problem here, which needs to be resolved in the coming months and years. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Chair.
It was raised earlier by one of the other TDs in relation to the Garda helicopter, and again, that for those of us who have need of that Garda helicopter, and certainly in my constituency, it's a regular it's regularly used right across the constituency. I'd be concerned about that, and is there? I don't know if you have any influence in relation to that, Minister, but if it's not going to be operating at weekends, is there another site that we could use in relation to that? Because I think it's critical, it's for supports in all sorts of ways, whether it's serious accidents, a serious incident, the Garda helicopter is brought in. So again, the idea that we wouldn't be able to use it on the ground is simply appalling. So I'd be interested in your views on that, Minister.
Yeah, so just to say in conclusion, I agree with the need that Deputy Smith, the point Deputy Smith makes in terms of the need for that kind of structural strategic look at those key pinch points, those personnel. And I take the point he makes around commercial activity. To Deputy Crowe's point, without over-commenting in relation to it for a load of operational and security reasons, there are workarounds in place to ensure support for the Gardaí in terms of the Garda Air Support Unit, and also in relation to our air ambulance situation. So I do want to assure the House that contingency planning is in place in relation to this. But I also want to say this: the government was asked by our military leadership to do something this week to provide the service commitment scheme. I was told if we did it, it would be quite impactful in terms of getting the hours back up and running to where they need to be. We need to obviously see that followed through now as quickly as possible, and that's where my focus is going to be.
Teachtaí Carol Ledall.
Tánaiste, as you know, the programme for government committed to the development of a revised national security strategy, one that reflects the changing threats and geopolitical realities Ireland now faces. Progress has been made with the establishment of the National Security Council and Secretariat, but 5 years on from the original commitment, the full strategy remains outstanding. Can you outline the role your department is playing in finalising this crucial work, and when we can expect to see the draft strategy published?
Thank you very much to Deputy Crowe for the question. And as he rightly says, our programme for government securing Ireland's future sets out a number of commitments relating to national security. I'd argue it's probably the most robust programme for government in terms of national security, and the focus, quite rightly, on security and defence infrastructure. It acknowledges that this is a time of geopolitical upheaval, a time of challenges to democracy internationally, with threats and challenges arising from the rapidly changing geopolitical landscape across the world. In this context, our government will bring forward a number of measures relating to justice, to defence, to cyber security and central coordination, a review of our existing structures and a national security strategy. and all are, I suppose, are pieces of a puzzle with the view to enhancing further our national security. The Taoiseach recently established the Ministerial National Security Council, which you alluded to. As Tánaiste and Minister for Foreign Affairs, Trade and Defence, I and the Minister for Justice, Home Affairs and Migration are also the members of that council. Both the Department of Defence and the Defence Forces have current roles and responsibilities in relation to national security, including the fact that the Secretary-General of my department and the Chief of Staff are members of the National Security Committee and will also attend meetings of the newly established Ministerial Security Council. The Ministerial Council will ensure that at the highest level there is a structured ongoing review of our strategic national security interests and systemised monitoring of progress with delivery on the government's commitment in this area, including the delivery of our new national security strategy. Our national security strategy will reflect the changing geopolitical landscape, notably the altered security situation in Europe, and will ensure a whole-of-government approach to defence and deterrence. The preparation of that strategy is being coordinated by the National Security Secretariat in the Department of the Taoiseach, with inputs provided by a range of relevant stakeholders, including both my departments, the Department of Justice, the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications, our Defence Forces, the Gardaí and the National Cyber Security Centre. The preparation of a draft strategy covers a broad range of national security issues, and it will include the implication of most recent security, defence and international developments, their related impacts and the implementation of the report of the Commission on the Defence Forces. The timeline is a matter for the Department of the Taoiseach, but I expect it to be later this year.
Tánaiste, I suppose, as you're aware, the nature of national security has fundamentally changed. We're no longer talking solely about traditional military threats, but hybrid threats, cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, energy security, technological vulnerabilities and foreign interference. The world has moved at pace from the war in Ukraine to the instability in the Middle East and particularly in Gaza, right through to malign actors targeting critical infrastructure across Europe. Ireland still remains exposed. Our neutrality must not be mistaken for complacency. A small open economy such as ours is deeply vulnerable to economic, technological and political shocks. We do, however, have strong foundations, and I think it's important to get that across. We're not lame ducks. The Gardaí Síochána, the Defence Forces and an emerging intelligence capacity, but these need to be fully integrated under the national security strategy, as you've mentioned, and that we're not simply reactive, but genuinely anticipatory and robust in our preparations.
Thank you very much again, Deputy. I agree with everything you said. I mean, we face multiple threats and varied threats, not just Ireland, but all European countries, indeed many countries. And I was cheering inside when you said neutrality can't be used as an excuse for complacency. We all value military neutrality. There's an attempt sometimes in here, every time you mentioned defence and security, say, well, what about military neutrality? In fact, being militarily neutral, being militarily unaligned, if anything, places a greater obligation on us in terms of taking our own defence and security seriously, because we're not in a military alliance that can rely on others to do so. And that's why we do have to step up spending on defence and security, step up spending on justice and the infrastructure that the Gardaí require. But I will say this, as somebody who's been in government for quite a period of time now, I am really encouraged by the level of coordination that we're seeing, the structures that are being put in place, the breaking down of silos, real and perceived. And today we're moving ahead with the National Maritime Security Strategy, which again is another piece, recognising that it's a small country geographically in terms of landmass, but a vast ocean and the undersea cables and the likes that need to be protected. So yes, we have a lot of work to do in relation to this. We do have strong foundations and we need to build on that in the time ahead, and we'll do that with both the Ministerial Council on Security and our new National Security Strategy.
Thank you, Tánaiste, and I think you've outlined it quite succinctly and quite well there. But I suppose one thing to bear in mind as well is if the strategy will incorporate external expertise to ensure it reflects best international practice. That's not necessarily from the private sector. We'll be looking to our partners in Europe specifically, and then obviously to our Canadian and American partners when it comes to deep sea cables as well, and the protection of those. And also crucially will it provide a clear national security doctrine that allows the state to protect itself across all domains, not just in traditional defence. And I suppose you have outlined that it won't just be one single faceted, it'll be a multifaceted approach, and that it will be quite detailed. And Tánaiste, look, the illusion of security is not enough. As you mentioned quite rightly, just because we're a neutral country does not mean we shouldn't be able to defend ourselves. And resilience must be real, structured and forward-looking. Good morning.
You're absolutely right, and I can assure you that it will be, and it will be multifaceted, because there's certain departments that have, I suppose, a primacy in terms of their direct responsibility for security of the state, the security of our country. My own department and the Department of Justice being obvious in relation to that. But actually all departments, all agencies have a role to play, and that's why I think it's so appropriate that this work is coordinated by the Department of the Taoiseach, that the Ministerial Council is chaired by the Taoiseach, that the National Security Secretariat resides within the Department of the Taoiseach, because that convening role and that ability to pull everybody together on this is both welcome and necessary. And I can assure the Deputy, and I'll seek a note for him on this, but yes, external expertise, most particularly international experiences and how we can learn from other jurisdictions, is very much underway, and I see that very much in my own department around the whole area of maritime security, looking at what other coastal nations have done and making sure we can learn from best practice too.
Marco.
Tánaiste. Now, obviously, I brought up the issue in relation to Sean Rooney. We know there is obviously a case at this point in time, but look, we've had many interactions, and I think there is agreement across the House that we need to seek justice for Sean Rooney, for the family of Sean Rooney, and also that we need to make sure that through all the processes that the learnings are carried out from a point of view that the absolute best protocols are carried out in relation to our defence forces. And on a question absolutely unrelated to the triple lock, it also means at times we probably need to have straight conversations with the UN and their responsibility, even in providing information. So if you could give an update in relation to I suppose the government's interactions in relation to trying to seek that justice and making sure all is done for Sean Rooney.
Absolutely, of course. So, the government remains absolutely committed to seeking and securing justice for Sean Rooney, justice for him, justice for his families, justice for the men and women of Óglaigh na hÉireann who served with pride and distinction with him. During my recent visit to southern Lebanon, I conveyed this in very clear terms and blunt terms to the new Lebanese government, to the Lebanese Defence Minister, to the Lebanese Foreign Affairs Minister also. I understand and respect the separation of powers and the independent judicial system, but the Irish people have been long-standing supporters of the people of Lebanon. We've stood by the people of Lebanon. We're proud to do that, a great people. We're proud to support Lebanon, their security, their peace, or their very fragile peace that we wish to uphold. But we do expect that after the brutal murder of Private Sean Rooney, that heaven and earth is moved to make sure that the perpetrators of this heinous crime are brought to justice. And I did take from my engagement with the Lebanese counterparts who are new to office in a new government, that message is both understood and that depth of feeling is shared by them as well. And I will be keeping in close contact with them, with our embassy presence in the region as well. And yes, without wanting to cut across any proceedings or court proceedings or anything else, there's obviously an obligation on the United Nations as well to support the provision of information in every way possible to the Rooney family. Sean Rooney's family deserve answers, deserve truth, and I certainly will be doing everything I possibly can to make sure we assist and support them in every practical way.
Look, I welcome what Tánaiste has said. Obviously, heaven and earth needs to be moved. That's in relation to justice, and here I accept we're out of time now. I would love to get a written answer. It's an issue I will be following up, and Tánaiste, if you could also, as quickly as possible, if we could resolve the issue in relation to John McNeela and the payment on the basis of Michael McNeela's sacrifice. I think that's the only right thing to do. Cúra maigad.